right from the very word go, when Rishi Sunak became prime minister, there was a definite feeling that there was a lot of unease within the Tory party that hopefully Sunak would be their lifeline to be able to get out of this absolute dismal hole that they were finding themselves in. But once again, the polls do not seem to agree with them. The much hyped up budget, which would be able to be a busting inflation breaking budget, as what it was deemed as, or what it was sold as, hasn't seemed to have, shall we say, got the voters behind them. The party is becoming increasingly ever split. And it's not just the fact that you had the ERG fail to materialize a rebellion, the fact that Johnson's star is very much waned, the idea that the age of rebellions is over, that the right, or is the far right of the party, is now less energized, more likely to rebel. Those fears can be very well truly ignored, because now we've got a 60 MP rebellion on hands, or coming up on deck, over the illegal immigration bill. Yes, this is the new illegal immigration bill put forward by Suella Braverman, which would essentially say if you arrive here illegally, again, massive definition of illegally, because they're also talking about people that get trafficked as well, pretty much meaning that if you get human trafficked here, maybe against your will or anything like that, you will be treated as a criminal. Even though in some cases it may not be your fault, you may have been trafficked against your will. Like I say, there is a lot around, especially when it comes to sort of modern slavery, which pretty much means that if you are a victim of this modern slavery, you've got no incentive to, once you arrive here, to go to the authorities to sort of help you out, because no, instead they are going to arrest you, even though it's not your fault. There's a ton of stuff in this bill which is just absolutely, bananas is one way of putting it. But it goes into even more interesting stuff when we start to talk about what the rebels are after. So, before we go talking about this new Tory Rebels, and of course, this yet another rebellion that Sunak has to try and see off, because, well, again, if he doesn't, this is going to cause a lot of problems for him. And of course, we'll see what happens. But before we do that, please do remember to click that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button down below and the Pony Club as well. So, let's talk about this then. So, this whole immigration law bill is basically bad from the outset. The whole idea is to essentially try and be really hard and hard hitting. And the idea is that if you are really sort of mean or cruel, that essentially immigrants won't come here. But remember, ever since, well, 2016 and Brexit itself, we've had this harder right wing, punish sort of moves in place. But that hasn't stopped immigrants coming here. No, instead, the number has risen. And this is not just by small boats, because once again, as we always point out, even though people do arrive by, small boats, that is a tiny fraction of the way that immigrants actually arrive into the UK. It is mostly, surprise, surprise, by aeroplane. And yet you don't see Farage out there with a sign saying "Stop the planes," because, well, that would make him look completely foolish. We've talked about this before many, many times. They could end this literally overnight by setting up safe routes. If they set up safe routes, small boats would end overnight, instantly. But they don't, because, well, that's not right-wing enough for the current Tory party. Why? Well, this all goes back to the UKIP days, because what was the primary focus of at least, Nigel Farage and UKIP at that time? Under David Cameron, he'd managed to move the Tories from being sort of very sort of right-wing party to a more sort of right centrist party, and this did not make a lot of Tories very happy. Certainly didn't make a lot of the Tory donors very happy as well. Hence why Farage was able to sort of galvanise that the UKIP support, as well as pull donors from, well, the Tory party over to UKIP, which is why they got all that money and the money backing them. And their whole aim, and he's even stated it himself, said it very publicly, one of the aims of UKIP was to push the Tory party back to the right. And in a way, they have succeeded. But the problem now becomes that you had a big UKIP infiltration, that you have had the non-Conservative Party parliamentary party voting in more and more right-wing MPs, and of course taking even more hard right stance, because so scared are they that another party may emerge on the right to start taking some of their votes, that they feel that they've got to go harder and harder and harder. And this is what this rebellion is all about. 60 MPs of the Tory right have basically stood up and said, unless there are provisions in this bill to essentially mean that we can just outright ignore the European Court of Human Rights, we're going to rebel. Remember, 60 is a very, very big number. As we said before, just last week with the Windsor Framework Bill that was being voted upon, any number of MPs rebelling above the number of sort of 43 basically cuts off any Tory majority. So at that point, the fact that you've got 60, the government is in clear trouble. That is the danger area that this bill is going to, well, implode. However, there is at least a bit of good news in and around this. Labour have managed, thanks to Yvette Cooper, has managed to get an amendment into this bill saying that the government should, and this will be the good point, will be forced to produce a framework of how it intends to work with European countries. And it has about 3 months to do that from the beginning of the bill passing. Not only that, it also forces the government to try and reintegrate with the European Crime and Database, which, if you remember, was one of the big things we were talking about, Brexit. And us rejoining that would be a massive boost to, helping to stop criminals. After all, after we were out of that database, we talked about the consequences of that. Well, a couple of years back about that by now, but that has been a constant problem and is something that we should ultimately rejoin. So, while ultimately what is in this bill is an absolute nightmare, there is at least this glimmer of at least hope that if it does pass, there's at least a good amendment in there that, is going to force the government to do some things that they won't like. And after all, they voted for it, they passed it, they said they'd have to do it. And if they don't do it, well, at that point, Labour can sort of, force them in ways to do it. There's parliamentary procedure that they can follow to force the government to sort of re-engage with that European crime database again, even though it desperately doesn't want to. Then, of course, the other problem then goes, what's Europe's going to reaction be? Because if this bill sort of does pass and does then sort of allow the government to ignore rulings from the European Court of Justice, or even leave parts of it, not all of it, but parts of it, you may remember, as we talked before just a couple of weeks ago, there are whole sections within the European withdrawal agreement that we sort of signed. The whole framework that we signed has basically the European Court of Human Rights running through it like a stick of rock, as you may remember, as the phrase was used. Ultimately, the EU will punish the UK for doing any action to ignore any of the rulings. And ultimately, that is something Rishi Sunak cannot afford. And if rumours are true that Suella Braverman has been the one leaking at least this bill prior to the Tory Rebels, and may even indeed be supporting the Tory Rebels secretly, then how long can she actually last as a cabinet member? Will he actually have the spine to get rid of her? Who knows? Only time will indeed tell. But this is going to be an absolutely awful bill, even if it passes, even when you've got that Labour amendment. But we'll find out probably very soon. Like I say, all this is taking place today. Like I say, the talks behind the scenes. Will it pass? Who knows? But the fact that, as we said, once again, back from the first thing that Rishi Sunak came in, that he would be facing constant rebellions. Well, guess what? Here's another rebellion that he's got to face down, or else there will be significant problems in the future. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to click on that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel. Of course, we'll see you all next time.